sanitation in particular, yeah, for the urban poor. So good afternoon. My name is Max Curly. I head the Mobile for Development department at GSMA. What a week it's been, even before the little water that we had. This is the last session in our Mobile for Development theater. I opened the first session back on Tuesday. It feels like it was an hour ago. It also feels like it was 2 weeks ago because there was so much going on this week. I'm still amazed by the quality and the quantity of the content and of the speakers, and of the interaction that we've had this week, and I hope you had as much of a good time as I did. So this is the last session, though, as they say, last but not least. Indeed, the focus of this session is going to be on the role of partnerships in driving access to more affordable, more reliable, safer, and more sustainable services across Africa. How do all of us, and that's public and private sector, that's local and global organizations, large and small, can work together to build partnerships and collaboration? Because these partnerships are really critical. A lot has been done already, of course, and we have celebrated many of those successes in the past 3 days here at MWC Africa. Yet in the face of the challenges that we're facing, not just a lot of rain, but rapid urbanization, climate change, and widening inequalities, we must work together. It's not always easy, and I really trust the speakers to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly today, but it's only with multi-stakeholders collaboration that we can deliver the impact that we need to deliver. So before we start, I wanted to give you a quick overview of what we've done and what we've learned in this space. As most of you will know, over the past decades through the GSMA Innovation Fund, we have supported more than 100 organizations, most of them startups and SMEs, the majority of them in Africa. And that was through the support of many of our donors, but in particular the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. This work has given us a unique seat and a unique opportunity to see how central partnerships are to the delivery of basic services in particular. We have supported, but at the same time we've also observed and learned. And we've realized the potential, but also seen how different organizational cultures, different time horizons, or even different strategic priorities can make for challenging partnerships. In all of our work, and that's much beyond our innovation funds, we at M4D are convinced that those strong partnerships are a key catalyst, but also a key enabler of digital innovation. So our Digital Utilities program, for instance, has placed a particular emphasis on partnerships between startups, private sector, and the public sector. And from these partnerships can really emerge innovative and impactful ways to address critical gaps in essential urban services, which neither party could really address on their own. We love to learn, but we love to share even more. And this is why the team has built a very practical toolkit for the utilities sector. The target audience is startups and SMEs working in markets like Africa, yet the findings and the frameworks can really be applied and used much more broadly. Beyond highlighting the value of collaborations between startups and the public sector, for those of you who are not convinced of it yet, it really provides a conceptual framework on how to think through, to frame, but also to define that collaboration, complemented by practical tips and tools to help them navigate this sometimes complex situations. The value of these tools is obviously in using them. We are using this toolkit ourselves, and we're very happy to work with anyone who's interested in applying it to their work. Please feel free to turn to the M4D team if you have any questions. But now I would like to invite on stage Akanksha Sharma, my colleague, and Julius Svoboda, who's Private Enterprise Officer for Power Africa at USAID. While they take their seats, I would like to take this opportunity to again thank everyone for joining us here in Kigali and for participating in all these sessions, the conversations, the roundtables in the past 3 days. Of course, we strongly believe in the power of mobile, and we've used it to gather ourselves virtually in the past couple of years, but it's been absolutely amazing to be here in person. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and we hope to see you in Barcelona in February, or at the very least here in Kigali next October. Thank you very much, and over to you, Akanksha.
Thank you, Max. And We're here to talk about partnerships, and you just saw our events team, marketing team, Radisson Blue team, all working together in a partnership, solving an issue that just cropped up. So, with that note, I would like to welcome you, Julius. Thank you for joining us today. How are we doing?
Thank you for having me, Akanksha. It's good to be here.
Great. All right. So, I wanted to start today's conversation hearing all about the HETA Alliance, which is Healthcare, Electrification, and Telecommunications Alliance. And that's a lot in a single alliance. So let's get started with what are these different partners doing together? What are you doing with it?
Yeah, and it is a bit of a mouthful, and so we feel like saying HETA is just a little bit easier. But the whole reason why this was created is, in March of 2020 at USAID, our leadership said, I don't care what your program is, what are you doing about COVID? And so Power Africa, we said, well, let's maybe see if we can bring some electricity to clinics because, at least 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa lack access to reliable power, and that extends to health clinics too. And so we did a grant program, we electrified 227 clinics, and it was really quite successful. And so we said, how many clinics are there that need electricity? And so we did some searching, and WHO says that at least 100,000 clinics in sub-Saharan Africa lack reliable power. And so we said, we need to do something about this. But, this is also something that we can't do alone. So we said we're going to kind of go at this for 10,000 clinics. Mm-hmm. And we worked with our colleagues that do healthcare, and they said, well, we would like to work with you, but we can't necessarily do power work. And we said, well, okay, but there's this big electricity problem at clinics. And we said, you can't do power work, but you have this huge digital strategy. USAID's digital for health strategy is very well detailed. It looks to be very well conceived, but there's a fundamental power gap they have. And they said, you know what, that's a good point. And so the digital piece has become this glue between working with our health colleagues and our power goals. And so that's kind of how we're looking at electrifying and digitally connecting these 10,000 clinics over the next 5 years.
Yeah, brilliant. And that must be difficult. So my question is, how do you get these different partners to work together, build consensus, get buy-in? And then, that'll probably come later, but how do you then maintain that partnership?
So at the beginning, that's been the whole way that we think that we can actually achieve this goal. 10,000 clinics is a very, very big financial requirement to electrify and digitally connect. And it's something that we can't do alone, and we kind of know that. But we recently awarded this HETA Alliance, and we have almost 30 partners that have expressed interest with us. But they're healthcare NGOs, they're nonprofits, they're companies in the power sector, they're governments, mm-hmm. either donor or host governments. And so what we have done is we've said, there's a lot of different ways you can look at electrification for clinics, digital connectivity for clinics, and healthcare. And so if you have a healthcare interest, well, what great way to work on ensuring health outcomes by making sure that the vaccines you're putting into people's arms are still viable, that lights are on at night for people, for doctors to do emergency procedures, or that medical professionals can have a laptop that they can enter in data and have it uploaded so the ministries of health can know where pandemics or different health outcomes are happening. So we've been working with different partners to say, what are your interests? How are you, what are your goals in this area? Is your goal around digital? Is your goal around health? Is it around power? And everyone we've talked to has one way that they've come in, but I don't think any one of them has said, oh, we do all three. And so the power of partnerships in regard to the alliance in this respect has been, I've kind of likened it a little bit to stone soup. No one organization has all the ingredients to the recipe. But we kind of don't know what the end is exactly going to look like. But we do know that we have a goal of 10,000 clinics, and everybody's kind of coming to the table with a piece that's going to help us attain that goal.
And what are the MNOs saying? Like, what's in it for them?
So what's in it for them? So, well, actually, GSMA,
Should answer that
as
question.
one of the members of the alliance members, working with you to map out where spectrum exists and maybe where it doesn't exist, looking at where you'd like to go, where spectrum could go from, like, say, 3G to 4G and maybe 4G to 5G. Understanding where towers are having theft for diesel, and say, hey, could we work with you to green this space where we can transition away from a diesel genset to power tower to some solar panels and a battery system, and then maybe oversizing that for the load for that tower to provide electricity to a clinic. So for the MNOs, it really varies. Some have said, well, we have white label digital products for health services that we'd like to provide to this alliance that will support health outcomes. Others have said, hey, we have kind of an emerging power pay-go system that has digital payments associated with it that we can use for the program. And so a lot of it is, how can we support M&O build out, increase coverage.
Yeah.
And this kind of falls very well into the digital inclusivity aspect, because a lot of where we see clinics lacking power and digital connectivity are more in the rural areas. And so how can we kind of meet some of those kind of ESG goals of some of the MNOs as well, to say we're expanding digital inclusion into the rural communities where spectrum or where connectivity maybe isn't quite so available today.
Yeah, interesting. And the final question is around states' involvement. So across different countries, the role of state in service provisioning varies a lot. What do you think is the role of government in facilitating these partnerships or partnering with the private sector?
So that's an awesome question, because whether as the U.S. government, we have a lot of convening power, and so there are certain things we can do. And I think sometimes governments kind of want to be everything to everyone, but we kind of also say too is that if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority, right? And so for governments, figuring out what is the competitive advantage, what is the strength that you bring to something like this. And so the way I see it, so the U.S. government has the capacity to have government-to-government discussions. Sometimes companies can't always have that access, or nonprofits. So that's one of the ways that we bring some of the U.S. government brings our strengths to the table, but then also looking at what host governments bring. There's an interesting thing that happened in Uganda when we electrified a clinic there just last year. This clinic lacked electricity. was only available during daytime hours because at night, obviously no lights. Security was low and people didn't necessarily feel comfortable for good reason. So this clinic was electrified, and that included things like a TV in the waiting room. So people kind of didn't mind waiting for service, right? And so people were more inclined to be helped. There, the number of people that clinic actually started seeing almost tripled. And because they had more capacity to see patients, the patients felt more, had greater confidence in the facility itself because there was electricity for certain things. And then when they reported that up to the central government said, well, you're doing a great job. We're going to give you guys more money and more resources for your clinic.
Yeah.
And that's a great outcome, right? And so now this facility has more attention from the government, more resources to do more for the local community. And so that's the type of thing that I think we want to see with this program, with this goal of 10,000 clinics, is where donor governments are there, kicks things off, kickstart things, had this huge stakeholder engagement with all these different partners, but the host governments are there right along with it to say, you know, resources are going toward this facility, and it's not just from, you know, outside partners, it's from that government as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julius, for your comments. I would like to now invite George Bauer, who is the director with the Digital Utilities Program, to speak to a panel of amazing members who will then tell you a bit more about how difficult it is to implement partnerships. Cheers. Thank you,
Kangsha.
Had to rearrange the mic quick. Thank you all for being here. We've heard a lot during this entire conference about that it takes an entire ecosystem to scale impactful solutions, and that's why I'm really excited about this panel discussion. We just had a discussion before this one on digital inclusion, and everyone mentioned the importance of partnerships to really make sure that everyone is digitally included and can be reached by digital services. And in this panel discussion, we'd like to dive a bit deeper and actually understand what some of these impactful partnerships look like, and also how they overcame barriers to multi-stakeholder partnership formation. So I'm really excited to welcome my amazing panelists. First of all, we have Tessie Rusagara, the Managing Director of Kigali Innovation City. Kigali Innovation City seeks to position Rwanda and Kigali in particular as an innovation hub on the continent and in the globe. Really looking forward to hearing from you, Tessie. Thanks for joining us. Next up, we'll have Lisa Hawks, a Sustainable Behavioral Change Manager at Unilever Transform. Transform is a partnership between Unilever, EY, and FCDO, and seeks to help impactful social entrepreneurs scale in low and middle income countries. Thanks, Lisa, as well, for joining us. Next up, we have Fred Waithaka, who's the head of regulation and public policy at Safaricom. I don't think at MWC Africa I'm going to do a big introduction of Safaricom. I think we all know them. Thanks a lot for joining us, Fred. And last but not least, we have Amaury Faster-Knuckles, who is the Chief Commercial Officer of Bbox. Bbox serves over 2.5 million people across Africa with modern energy solutions. It's a smart asset financing platform that works across the DRC, Togo, Rwanda, Nigeria, and Kenya. Thanks also, Amaury, for joining us. So Tessie, since you're sitting right next to me, I'll start off with you. Can you tell us a bit more about Kigali Innovation City, why it's important for the city of Kigali, and how it's positioning Rwanda and Kigali as an innovation hub, and how you work with different stakeholders from the private sector to startups and universities as well?
Thanks, George. Sorry. Can everyone hear me? Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. KIC is, like you said, our mission is really about how do we position Rwanda as a Pan-African innovation hub so that we can grow the knowledge economy. Part of how we, as a country, we believe economic and social transformation is going to come from changing our economy from an agrarian economy to a knowledge-based economy. And KIC is a big part of that. It's both a real estate project, so we have 62 hectares in it's phase 2 of an already successful economic zone, which includes VW and BioNTech will also be part of it. And what we aim to build is a mixed-use development that will host universities, tech and innovation companies of all sizes, so from startups to more established companies, and we would provide the infrastructure for that. So today we already have a couple of anchor tenants, mostly the universities. So we started with a talent, recognizing that we want world-class Pan-African talent here in Rwanda and grooming that talent. So Carnegie Mellon University Africa and the African Leadership University are already operational. We have one that's under construction. It's a biomedical engineering school to build skills in that space. And then AIMS, which is also a big STEM network. What's common across all these universities is Pan-African. Usually 50% of their student body is from Rwanda. The remaining 50% is from all over Africa. I think we now boast plus 40 countries at least represented across the universities, and now build onto that, leverage that talent pool for research, for enterprise, and just to help see how we can grow both the private sector and in ways that are relevant for the challenges that we face as a continent.
Well, thanks so much. That's fascinating. Last week I was at a renewable energy conference and I met some graduates of Carnegie Mellon University, and they were already thinking about how they can form a startup to better support renewable energy companies seeking to expand their services. So that impact is very clear. Fred, I'd like to come to you next. And you, as Safaricom, you engage with governments quite a bit on creating a more enabling environment for mobile operators. But how are your engagements also helping private sector innovators and startups in your country to thrive more? And you're creating also more of an enabling environment for them.
Okay. Thank you, George, and good afternoon to everybody. So I think at Safaricom we get a bit of a flavor of government in very many facets. Government is a shareholder, a major shareholder in Safaricom. Government is our regulator. Government is a customer to us. We are in an enterprise form, and government is a supplier to us. We source our backbone fiber that connects our various cities from the government through the national fiber optic plan. So as a consequence, we've had a good relationship with government, which we are able to leverage in terms of how we engage with various startups and also the larger developer community. So how have we done that? First is around how we focus on ourselves as Safaricom in terms of how we've engineered ourselves to engage with the startup community. The engineering that we are doing stems from lessons learned, where we have understood that we have been great at engaging with the larger corporates and not so great with the smaller organizations, particularly the startups. So what we've done is to start engineering a team that is specifically focused on the startup community, where we are looking at it in two forms. One, around how we invest in some of these high potential organizations, so having a VC arm. We already had a bit of a trial on that, on what we called the Spark Fund. So lessons from that are what we are now going to extend into this new team. And then second, how we work with these smaller organizations in terms of how we recalibrate our processes, in terms of how we recalibrate our engagement protocols with them. And then thirdly, how we're using our position to carry the voice and the concerns from the startup community into government, because we are able to use our size and our position to be able to have conversations with government. So those are some of the elements that we are putting in play to have to be able to influence and create a runway for the startup community.
Thanks a lot. So Safaricom's engagement with the government is not only creating more of an enabling environment for mobile operators, but also for other innovators. Really interesting. Amaury, next up, I would like to ask, most startups, when they hear about government relations, they want to run away from it. But government engagement has been quite central to Bbox's scaling journey, and Bbox is one of the few startups in the off-grid solar space that has a government engagement team and that has successful government partnerships in countries like Togo, the DRC, and Rwanda. Can you tell us a bit about why that's so important to you as an energy provider, and tell us a bit more about those partnerships as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a little bit about Bbox. So we've really started with energy, and that's been like the core of the business. Now we're moving towards more asset financing in general of other products, including mobility, cooking solutions, smartphones, etc. I think our background in very much utility-based business has made us quite good at communicating and working with governments. So one of the realizations that we've had in the last maybe 5 years is that in order to reach universal energy access, which is the objective by 2030 all over the world, we're not going to be able to bring power to the poorest people in the planet without subsidy and without government intervention. That's a bit the premise that we started with a few years ago. I think we believe that quite strongly, but then we believe as well there is a few ways that are better to do it. We don't believe in full grant programs. We believe in a very market-driven approach. And so how do governments engage with that? And so we developed our own approach and recommendation in terms of how governments can approach the electrification program. And I think with some of the governments, for example, in Togo, there's been a very collaborative approach in terms of creating subsidy program that would be smart, that would be efficient, that would work for the private sector, as well as to reach the objective at the end of the government to bring electricity to everyone at the least cost possible. So, and to do this, yeah, we've had to have people working specifically on government relations to communicate this, work with universities to write white papers, and real research that shows what is the least cost of electrifying people and how easy it is to implement. And I think there's a few good examples on how this has been successful. In Togo, there is a program that's called the CISO program. It's very smart, that has been built with the government there, where we're directly integrated with the government, and so the government sees when we receive a payment, and will match every payment from the customer. A very, very efficient program in terms of having to check which systems have been installed, etc. Another good example is in DRC, where we co-created with the industry, the solar industry, the sector, a subsidy program, and we managed to get a presidential commitment to start actually the first tranche of the program, and that has led to unlocking a further program with the World Bank that now will be from above 200 million up to 500 million for electrification in the DRC. So I think it's quite important to create that exchange and that expertise that we can share from multiple countries. And the third example is maybe in Rwanda, where we've been always talking to the government quite closely about refining the subsidy program, and now it's very successful. And I think Rwanda is quite well on track now to reach universal electrification, probably in the next year and a half, which is quite impressive.
Wow, I know we have a lot of work to do to reach SDG 7, but it's critical that such programs exist so that we can reach everyone. It's also really interesting to hear about the role that digital innovation can play in enabling this collaboration between the public and the private sector. Lisa, last but not least, I also wanted to ask you, you've ran a utilities challenge in which you've selected certain utilities to partner with the private sector. Could you tell us a bit about what that challenge was all about? Why you've chosen those particular 2 utilities in Kenya, and what kind of lessons you've learned from that challenge as well?
Yes, of course. First of all, a little bit about Transform. So as you mentioned, we're a joint initiative between Unilever, the FCDO and EY. And what we do in our normal day jobs is support social entrepreneurs with a combination of grant funding and technical assistance from Unilever and EY. And this was a bit of an experiment where we wanted to see if we could apply that methodology to work with utilities rather than startups. And to do that, we had some funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Unilever's role was providing expertise on behavior change approaches, and EY came in and did behavior change management. And one of the lessons that reflects the fireside chat we had earlier is that I think there needs to be a case for more unusual partnerships. It's sort of easy when you can see you have a very similar opinion, you have very similar approaches. But actually what we found in this partnership was the diversity of thought produced some different results. So you might think, what would a soap and soup company bring to a utility launching their very first sanitation business? But actually it was in applying the behavior change approaches that we think about when we're trying to change people's behavior to wash hands, that some of the insights came. So in answer to your question, it was helping 2 utilities, actually one in Kenya, one in Zambia, to launch their very first sanitation businesses. They really stood out because their leaders, their MDs, firmly believed in this mandate. And I think we underestimate a little bit how scary this can be. This is us asking utilities for the very first time to start offering these services. And often their identity is that they do water. And you ask them to go and run a sanitation unit, and they're like, I don't have the people, I don't know anything about that. And so we have a duty to help them get over that hurdle and gain confidence and gain those skills. The thing that Unilever brought to the table was this behavior change approach, and we applied our Unilever 5 levers of change, which I'll go into a little bit of detail, but you can find good YouTube videos if you're interested to find out more. So the 5 levers of change are to make behaviors understood, why you're doing something, to make it as easy as possible, to make it a habit, to make it rewarding, and to make it desirable. And we applied these throughout the project, actually. And in the project, we were aiming to formalize the currently informal practice of pit latrine emptying. And that's a horrible, dirty practice which is done without any PPE, where people are entering toilets, exposing themselves to diseases, and then they're putting the waste generally in the environment. They're not putting it in a safe place, which is away for treatment. And this was these 2 utilities, Malindi Water and Sanitation Sewerage Company and Southern Water and Sanitation Company in Zambia, entering this market for the first time and providing the training, the PPE, the transport in order to do that. And what was really exciting was applying this behavior change approach. We could see that actually both sides of this equation wanted to change their behaviors, but for different reasons. So if you asked customers, you need to have your toilet emptied, how is that for you right now? People would be so frustrated, like they'd almost like hunch up. I can't find anyone to do this job. When they come, it's filthy. They renegotiate the price halfway through. It's just frustrating. And so the main lever we were trying to act on in both projects actually was making it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing and call the formal practice through the utilities. And then on the pit emptier side, you might think, and we thought initially it's going to be really hard to ask them to formalize, it's extra processes, extra PPE, extra bother. But when you ask the manual pit emptiers, what do you not like about your job? Especially in Kenya, they said, we have no status. We are actually despised by the community, and we do our work at night because people don't want to see us in the day. So out of all of those 5 levers, making it desirable was the one, and giving them status was the one that we tried to play with the most.
Wow. There's a lot in there that was really interesting. So first of all, I picked up on unusual partnerships, the importance of those. I think that's a really important point that also came out of a lot of the discussions at this conference. Then the importance of public sector champions that really want to drive innovative solutions. And then lastly, integrating behavior change and customer centricity into everything and making sure that these partnerships can go to scale, because that's the only way we can reach SDG 6. Fred, I'm just coming back to you because you're the head of regulation and public policy at Safaricom. So you sit in a lot of meetings with the public sector with a certain goal in mind for your enterprise. So if you were to advise a smaller private sector innovator or startup on how to approach government relations and government partnerships, what would your advice be?
I think it will be quite easier, and that is that treat government like you would any other relationship. If I want to get to know Lisa and I want to get to know about Unilever, I would want to understand what their key focus areas are, to then understand how I can then plug in and collaborate with her and her organization. Same style of thinking when you engage with government. So government is a huge machinery, and obviously the bureaucracy that surrounds it is less to prevent access, but more to control spending and development agenda. So that's a lesson that we have learned over time as Safaricom. So getting to understand then what government's focus areas are. Number two, getting to understand how government works, to then know how you time your requests or your engagements into government. Because unlike the corporate world where we can sit over coffee, agree, and then quickly move, you will not have that fluidity in government. So we need to be able to know how they are timing, how things move from a strategy into a plan operate. Then third, I think you mentioned it was Lisa, having someone who champions. What we have learned is that whenever we engage with government, you need to identify a strong anchor who's able then to push the agenda through. Because without that, as I said, government is a big machinery. Whatever it is that you're asking or trying to push through or partner gets lost in that expanse. And then fourth, when you do identify your anchor, your focus, be able then to have good resources behind whatever it is you want to implement. So be ready to invest in time, be able to invest in people, then to be able to push your agenda through. So I think those are some of the elements that I would encourage or advise an organization looking to work with government.
Fred, it almost seems like you read our toolkit, because you hit so many points from recognizing that government are made up of people and you have to have relations with those individuals, understanding government timelines, public sector champions, and also putting some resources behind government engagement. That's really fascinating. Now, Tessie, on the flip side, thinking about the partnerships that you have with private sector within Kigali Innovation City, how, as a public sector official, do you make sure that those partnerships really also meet your objectives? We know that a lot of public-private partnerships sometimes get stalled or don't thrive because it isn't really a win-win partnership. So how do you make sure that when you collaborate with different private sector partners, you get the most out of it from a public sector perspective as well?
Thanks, George. And maybe I'll start by building off what we just talked about. I think sometimes people don't understand the constraints as well that are within government, right? So usually there's limited bandwidth in terms of people, in terms of financial resources, and the ratio of ideas to government is many to one, right? And so everyone's coming, oh, I can do this, but there's 20 of you. And it's something that we're constantly thinking about. How do you handle this? Because on one hand, you're trying to grow the ecosystem and you're trying to create pipeline and there's a need, but there's also the reality about, resources and also process, if you're looking at procurement and so on. And then the readiness of the startups as well, or the innovators to be able to do this and giving someone a chance. So a couple of things that led by our Ministry of ICT that have been done So this year, through the procurement law, they managed to put in one method for procuring for innovation, where you could actually tender out a problem statement. And so creating more avenues for innovation and for innovators to actually be able to have a chance to pitch. And then within that, it's what you're asking for is, do you have a great idea and can you execute, and can we support you, versus can you get a bank guarantee and do you have 3 years of financial and tax statements. So I think there's also trying that, there's also efforts around, helping clean up data and defining what's the right architecture for government data, so that can then be opened up, and then also making it easier for startups to access it, instead of you having to then have MOUs with different ministries. So I think there's a lot that also needs to be done in terms of supporting even your partners to have access to resources that, whether it's people, financial, for them to test out that they might not have. In terms of the flip side, on the private sector side, I think typically it depends on the nature of the engagement. We have different kinds of public-private partnerships. Within KIC specifically, we have a private partner who's supporting on the real estate delivery. What they've brought is a market-led approach to how you execute the project. And I think there's a lot to be said about what the private sector does. But in general, as a country, I think when there's that level of PPPs, there's always an expectation of accountability and results and what's expected, in the same way that the public sector has it. But so through the partnership, there's ways that you have to monitor that. So I think there's, assessing who's the right partner, what do they bring to the table. But it also gives the private sector a chance to say, this is what I need to be successful, and this is where the support can be. So I think there have to be clear goals and what you're trying to get, but I think also recognizing that each party usually has a role to play, and the reason why you have a PPP is that you need the private sector for something, and the private sector needs the public sector for something else. And so then negotiating what that support can look like on both sides is important, and then making sure you monitor it.
Fascinating. So clear objectives are really important, and knowing where you want to take the partnership as it goes through the partnership formation journey and the scaling of the partnership. But what I also thought was really interesting is that government can actually do a lot to support private sector innovators and the private sector innovator ecosystem to grow through things like public procurement and data. So those points are really interesting. Amaury, next up on your end. So you described a bit that B-Box, initially obviously was quite focused on the energy sector, but now you're really sort of branding yourself as a smart asset financing platform that works across a range of different use cases, not just solar, but also smartphones, cook stoves, solar water pumps, and other use cases like e-mobility. We heard recently a new partnership with Ampersand here in Rwanda. Can you talk a bit about how central partnerships are to this sort of platform approach, and how you look at that in B-Box? I think you need to press the other button, sorry. There
Okay.
you go.
Yeah, just a little bit, again, on government partnership. I think it was interesting to hear both Fred and Tissa talking about it. I think one of the things that we really had to learn from the private sector is we often talk about, oh, we need help from the government, and different things, but often it took us a long time to really learn what is the clear ask that you really need, is it, lower taxes, is it, a communication program, and having a very clear ask that is required, and also on the other side, being very clear on what can be delivered for that value, right? And I think that a lot of people talk very hypothetically about PPPs, whereas often where it lacks is there's not a very concrete step that is right there, and also not always the delivery that can be maintained. And it's very short-sighted to sell a lot of dream, for a PPP and then not be able to deliver. So that's something that also I think we all need to be very careful about not asking for too much or promising too much in return, because that will burn the relationships. And at the end, it's all about relationships, across the entire government in the different ministries that exist, right? Then the second question about our move towards a super platform, and for us, yes, we have, on top of the government partnerships, we have a lot of corporate partnerships that we need to maintain. So this can be in the form of, you know, they can be customer or they can be distributors, you know, they can be allies. I mean, for example, with MNOs, something that we do that is quite interesting is that we've started electrifying towers as the anchor load for mini-grids, basically. So mini-grids are not necessarily financially viable on their own. So they need some kind of subsidy. It can be either government-led, or it can be led by an anchor that is like a cell tower. So we've done this a few times in Togo, in DRC, with Orange, Vodafone, TogoCell. And that's obviously quite interesting because you work with the community, you work with the telco, you work maybe with their provider at the moment, at that exact time, to operate that cell tower, etc. So a lot of partners. Then for the platform, one interesting switch for us is that to really streamline, we're starting to have a lot of people selling their product on our platform. So how do we streamline and manage vendors? I mean, we're not at the stage of being an e-commerce, you know, with hundreds of thousands of vendors, but it's something that we need to start thinking about. And then the last one on distributor, I think every single one of our agents and people that distribute our product is a real partner. And that's something that we need to really cherish and take good care of. And then we have corporate partner in distribution like Unilever, for example, as well.
Great. Thanks a lot for sharing that. Lisa, I did want to come back to you on one point on the challenge you supported, because in a lot of cases, such donor-supported or enabling organization-supported programs are supported for an initial time period, but then the donors go out and the funding is not there anymore, and sometimes those projects stall or even don't exist anymore. So how did you make sure that it was really a sustainable project that continued to deliver value, and sort of what's your perspective on that? I think in the utilities ecosystem we see many examples of sort of ad hoc pilots, but taking things to scale is really hard. So what's your perspective on that?
So I think three things were important in this project when we're thinking about scale. The first is recognizing the role of subsidy. So, I mean, you've already mentioned how subsidies playing a role in Bbox's model, and that's something where the consumer sees an immediate benefit. Like, they see a light, it's on. But for sanitation, it's way down the line that you see the benefit. So it's much more difficult consumer proposition to ask somebody to pay for this. These were very early stage pilots, so they were helping utilities serve their very first customers. But the early indications that WASUP, Water and Sanitation for the Urban Poor, did was that the current costs of service were about 6 times what the poorest could afford, which sounds very bleak and was very bleak. However, they also estimated that with a subsidy of about 5 to 10% on top of water bills, the service could be covered. And so I think the role of subsidy is vital, and that is the role of the utility to have that conversation with their regulator. They're the right people to do it. But by doing pilots like this, it shows the regulator that they're not just out to make a quick buck, that this is really a very difficult service to enter. And I also want to mention that I think that subsidies available for both CapEx and OpEx as model scale are very important. The second thing is about embedding it within the utility itself, because that's where you get the benefit of the scale of their whole operation. So during your pilots, you're probably working with a small number of people, but as it scales, you want to be working with that whole organization. I wanted to show you my notepad, which is from Malindi Water, and what they did was they had an all-staff meeting, and they briefed the whole team, the whole of the organization about the project. They gave them all new uniforms, and they inaugurated Sanitation Wednesdays. So as a water utility, they said, we're probably going to still talk about water a lot, but could we talk about sanitation at least on Wednesdays? And they asked everybody to talk to a customer, a family member, about sanitation to start instilling that kind of approach, that we don't just do water anymore, we do sanitation as well. And then the final part is that if you get this right, utilities are a fantastic potential partner for startups to scale. So in the Malindi Water Project, we're working with Sanovation, who is a private company. What they do is they make wastewater treatment plants that take human waste, they combine it with biomass, and they make industrial fuel. And through the partnership with the utility, they're able to get World Bank funding to install Malindi Water's first sewage treatment plant, fecal sludge treatment plant, which is going to be using this innovative technology and proving out that model. And that access to that finance is something that I think Sanovation would have found it much more difficult to go alone. So that funding was 585 million shillings, which at current exchange rates is 4.1 million pounds. So yeah, they can really be a scale partner for delivering these systems and unlocking the funding that are needed to take them to scale.
That's fascinating. I think I picked up on, again, two very interesting points. So one is bringing the entire staff of the public sector along when it comes to a certain project and really making them own it. Our program works a lot on topics like water utility digitization, and it's really important that those kind of projects are not siloed in like the IT department only, but are really owned by the entire staff. And that's a really interesting point. And then the second one is actually startup or private sector innovator public sector partnerships can help crowd in funding from the private sector, from other funders, to build things like fecal sludge treatment plants, which have huge developmental importance for those public sector stakeholders. That's really interesting. Fred, coming over to you again. Obviously, we've talked a bit about how you partner with the public sector, but Safaricom is also a great partner to a number of startups and private sector innovators. Can you talk a bit about those partnerships and why Safaricom can be such an important and catalytic partner to startups and private sector innovators?
Okay. All right. So at Safaricom, we believe that success only comes through partnership. Our purpose has always been about transforming lives, and you'll see that imbued in everything that we do. The products that we develop, how we engage with the community, and even how we engage with our subscribers. So when it comes now to partnership with other organizations, as I said earlier, it has been a journey of learnings, where we are saying that we have had two avenues in the past, where we have a clear path, clear protocols around the larger organizations, but a more bumpy and less defined route with the smaller organizational community. So as I mentioned, we are re-engineering that process to be able then to bring both into harmony, because our clear understanding is that if we don't invest in our local communities, then as a country, we'll not be able to grow and we'll not be able to reach the aspirations that we are all trying to get to. We found that over time, the more we invest back, the more we do gain, even as a corporate. But that statement that I've just made, you would find almost a conflict when you look at the other side of our business, which is our mobile money business. On that side, we have been very collaborative across all layers. What do I mean? The M-Pesa platform is fully open to the developer community, for example. On a self-service basis, the APIs are open. Get in there, tinker, do your thing. As we sit now, we have about 50,000 developers who are interacting with the M-Pesa platform in one way or another. The consequence of that is that the mobile money space in Kenya, as you all know, is quite ubiquitous. I can't remember the last time I touched cash, and it's not an exaggeration. You're able to move from one day to another fully on the M-Pesa platform. And as we continue to grow our platform into a super app where I'm able to also engage with other vendors through our mini app program, that again provides opportunity for growth for other organizations as well.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, really important to underline that mobile operators are platforms for innovation and can also support countries in realizing their national development objectives and supporting the innovation ecosystem. Amaury, coming back to you, you know, Bbox has been quite successful in raising funding from a range of different investors. And I just wanted to know if you could share a couple of lessons with regards to raising investment, because you work in a sector, electricity, that's not always seen as the most attractive by the VC ecosystem and investors in general, compared to, let's say, more sexy sectors like fintech. So how do you actually get investors to support you when they hear about even government partnerships being part of the equation and subsidy programs? That sounds all very complex to the VC community. So how were you so successful in your fundraising journey?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, definitely well, it used to be easier maybe as a fintech, you know, and it's also a bit the explanation why we're switching towards a more asset financing platform in terms of the fundraising. Well, as you all know, right now fundraising is not an easy thing at this exact stage. How we fundraised in the past, so we've raised about $200 million in total, probably a bit more, including the recent debt deals. So we have different kind of investors. We have a lot of debt because we do asset financing, so obviously that's a large part of it. And then we've brought in a lot of investors that had strategic interest in this industry. So we have investors like Engie or EDF, two big French world utility companies, Mitsubishi Corporation, who is very involved in the energy sector more broadly. So I think there's been always a big affinity with this, but then we were quite aggressive and growing quite fast, so there's still very strong interest from more VC investors and people that believe equity stories and are interested in that. So this is a bit of fundraising journey. I think right now in the next few years, I mean, we're probably looking at having some extra capital more from financial focused companies like VCs, you know, growth investors, but then probably at some point do an IPO to really grow the business across all the continents.
Thanks for that. Tessie, last question to you, because then I was told I have to move on to the Q&A section. Also on financing and funding, obviously from a public sector perspective, how do you work with funders and financiers, and how can they help you in making sure that Kigali is an innovation hub, both from an ecosystem perspective and also from a direct startup support perspective?
No, it's a great question. Right now what happens is, I'd say we work both on the system and in the system, just so that we can grow as we grow the ecosystem. So, for example, we look at the life cycle of startups. It's a young ecosystem. Most people are still, you know, pre-seed stage. Well, some getting to Series A. And so we've done a couple of things. One, through the support of the African Development Bank, the government of Rwanda was able to seed a venture capital fund. It's privately managed, so that you know, investment decisions are done in a manner that's private sector driven, and the fund manager also had to raise private capital as well, so that it wasn't just a purely public fund. And I think through that process, we've also learned a lot of lessons about, you know, how what VCs are looking for in startups, how do you improve the quality of support for startups, but also how do you educate your ecosystem about the different types of financing, what venture capital needs, you know, the expectations of growth, and so on. So I think it's also Pan-African, just in line with our mission to be Pan-African and to support Pan-African growth. But it's really been a great lesson in terms of showing you what the challenges are within your ecosystem. We also look at how do we improve the quality of support for startups. And one key thing there is, there's a lot of new players in the space, incubators, accelerators, which is all great for building pipeline. But we're now also looking at the verticals. What are the key verticals, and how do you make sure that there's more specialized support to help those startups? So we're both looking at pipeline development, but also, what are the intermediaries needed, what support is required, and in some cases, where do you step in? We have a big startup competition we launched last year. We'll continue to run every year to also build culture and awareness, not just from students to even corporates and so on, so people can be just more aware of the great work that's happening in the ecosystem and be more open to supporting them. But like I said, I think it's a journey. It's understanding where you are, what the needs are, and then working in some cases on supporting the intermediaries, but where you need to step in and build it up until someone else can come and take over.
I really like that. So really finding context-specific solutions and finding different innovative financing and funding tools that can support the innovation ecosystem. I'm really excited to come back here in a few years and see where you've taken the project. I'm sure it's going to be amazing to see. I just wanted to give the audience a chance to come in as well and ask our great panel some questions. So please, if we have any questions, please stand up briefly, introduce yourselves, questions, not long statements, please, and thanks.
Hi, my name is Geoffrey. I run a startup from Uganda that provides energy solutions, both on the mobile and mobility front. So we do portable power stations and power banks to enable mobile phone users in rural areas keep their devices charged. My question is more around, I know there's one startup on the stage, and I've found startup to startup partnerships much easier than startup to or B2B, like large enterprise like Safaricom size or government-style partnerships to be very difficult and time-consuming to craft. At times, you might have all the information and all the, all your ducks in a row, but navigating the bureaucracy. I mean, Rwanda is different, but I think it's one of a kind. Other countries, other governments are a lot harder to deal with in terms of bureaucracy. Any thoughts from, anyone on the panel who has managed to work out the bureaucracy side of things from a large organization perspective, and also from the Rwandan government on how they've worked to reduce the bureaucracy and how they can advise founders in other geographies or countries on how to partner with government? That's my question. That's why the Ampersand B-Box partnership was like made in heaven, because it's easier for, two startups to work together than it is for,
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely easier with two startups to work together, but I think it's just the decision power is a lot more centralized, like the organization are not the same size. So, I mean, Ampersand is really easy. I'm also based in Kigali, so it's just a matter of, having coffee, a few times, and staying at each other's office for long enough, and it was going to work out. I think big corporations are not as complex as governments sometimes, right? And they have their approval process, they're complex, the ownership is not always clear, and it takes a lot of energy and resilience, I think, to get things through, and spend time at the office of, the big companies, to try to know the people, to sit next to them until things happen. I think it's critical, but maybe you guys can comment a bit more on government in Rwanda and big companies like Safaricom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, come in.
Yeah. It's a work in progress. So I think the challenge is there's always, like I said earlier, around resources, there's process, there's approvals, and so on. And startups, you get companies of all sizes in terms of their readiness, their maturity, and the ability to deliver. And on the other side, you have constraints on the public sector, whether it's it's also risk-taking. What's the appetite for risk-taking? And so I think to the extent possible, if you're able to find ways to prove, to pilot and figure out what's quick success you can demonstrate, so that when you're also coming to the table, someone's not betting on an idea, but they're betting on progress. It helps. And then, yeah, like, we're trying to see what different ways can you look at, like the public procurement, different ways to change the system and work within the system to open it up for more innovators. But it's really a difficult process when it comes to asking people that, take a bet on someone, and especially when you're not sure what the readiness is, when they might not have the resources to assess what's the readiness of this company themselves, and so on. So I would say, as much as possible, try to be as ready and, proven your concept. We're trying to make sure that through the intermediaries and startup funds, we're supporting the startups to meet those milestones, so that they're more mature when they're at the table. But typically, that's what I would advise. Just try be as ready as possible, so that someone is confident that you'll be able to deliver, or they at least know you have a great understanding of their industry and you're willing to work together and partner together.
As far as Safaricom is concerned, our offices are available for anyone who wants to come and spend as much time as they want. The coffee is not all that great, but the company is better. I think on our part, what I'll say is commercial engagements are a lot easier for us to close than investment-focused ones. So perhaps for the startup community, that might be an alternative way of finding collaboration, perhaps from organizations of our size, who may not have a clear path of engagement with startups from an investment perspective, where you find the area of synergy and collaboration, and then grow that into an investment relationship over time. So perhaps that would be my guidance to you, Geoffrey, and others who perhaps may have similar sentiments.
Thanks. Lisa? Yeah.
Just one quick thing to add is that as early as possible in the conversation, it's vital to establish, are you talking to the right person? Are you talking to a decision maker? And champions, as we've discussed, are essential. You might find somebody in the wrong role who totally gets it, really has the vision. Don't lose that person. Use them to help navigate you internally. But in a lot of our cases, it needs to be a procurement person you're going to be speaking to. And so the sooner you get to that person, don't exhaust yourself with the good coffee or the bad coffee in the offices with the wrong person. Make sure you're speaking to the right person.
Thanks a lot. I think we have time for one more question. Yes, right there, I think. Or let's do two questions. Okay. Two, we can take them back to back maybe? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. The name is Amelie Ghana. I want to find out that, or I assume that if I take startups, I can put corporate and still have the same conversation, possibly around data sharing partnerships as an example. And then what would be the sustainability looking at our environment? Governments are not that stable in our part of the world. So what would be the conversation around sustainability beyond what you've just described? So one is partnerships from corporates, and then the second being how can we navigate the sustainability conversation when it comes to the political environment? Thank you.
One more. Yeah, right there.
Good afternoon. My name is Joyce. I work for Hires Refugee Trust of Kenya, and I think my question goes to Fred. So in Kenya, we have over 500,000 registered urban refugees, and some of the interventions we have includes cash interventions where we send them money. One of the challenges we face is on M-Pesa, because you're not able to actually give them money through phones, and some of them actually have access to the telephones. So my question goes to you, what are some of the partners or partnerships that we need to form to actually enable these beneficiaries be able to access funds easily? Thank you.
Fred, maybe you take the second question first, and then we'll come back to the first one.
All right, thanks, Joyce. And you brought up an issue that's currently quite close to us. We appreciate the number of refugees that are currently hosted within our borders. And we appreciate that as a corporate, we do have a responsibility to them to be able to facilitate their living while they are under the care of our various agencies. Unfortunately, even as we recognize that responsibility, we also do recognize some of the limitations under the law around the identification of those who can access the M-Pesa system. As we currently sit, refugee cards unfortunately cannot be accepted as a form of KYC and verification to allow for registration on our platform. So what are we doing about it? And thank you, Joyce, for just making yourself known. I think we can have a chat after this. We have been engaging our regulator and also the government directly to be able to have a change to the NPS regulations to allow for refugee card use in terms of M-Pesa registration. Discussions have at an advanced stage, but additional voices will always help to tip that process. So I think this is a discussion I'd be happy to have with you to see how we can collaborate.
Yes, and then on the next question, I think we had one on corporate partnerships and the other one on sustainability and political stability. What you want to comment on that one, Tessie, or? Yes.
Also curious with the Unilever. Yes. So I think with the sustainability, there's two fronts, and it also depends on the nature of the engagement, because sometimes if something is very novel, you're testing and experimenting, and then based off what you learn, you're then able to scale. So I think there's many ways you can look at it, but the big thing I find is that if you deliver, people will continue to come to you. So I think there's a big part, the responsibility on focusing on delivery and meeting what you say you'll do, people come to you. And then to the discussion about finding a champion and so on. I think, yes, you find the champion, but eventually whatever agreements you sign need to be with an institution so that there's some element of longevity to it that can be followed up. A lot of times what you find is people stop at, and I think there's a bit of an onus sometimes on also the private sector for you to lay out the path. So you find a lot of people who work really hard to get the MOU, but they're not thinking about, okay, what happens next? What's the path? What will be maybe like the definitive agreement once there's success? And you need to constantly be thinking that, informing your partners and so on, so that they know when we hit these milestones, this is where we go next. And I think that also helps. And then follow up, so the conversations around government relations. So making sure there's follow-up, constant communications and so on, I think allows, and now within the right people in the organization, because sometimes what happens is the people who sign you up and who you sign with might not be necessarily the people who implement. How are you able to sustain a relationship across the board? Because you'll need the people who implement to be successful, but you'll need the people who sign when you want to come for a renewal. So making sure you understand that and are able to navigate that and are always thinking about what will the next steps be is important, including the next steps. If we don't hit our targets, why? How do we have the relationship to be able to come back to the table and have a frank conversation so that you're given that opportunity to change targets if you need to. So I think, yeah, relationships is still.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I'm just going to quickly head over to the podium to officially close the session and actually the entire development theater, because we had the last session within the development theater. But before I do that, please give it up for my amazing panelists. I think we heard some really interesting insights today. Thanks so much for joining me. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you to all of our partners who've made this development theater session possible. We've heard a lot of interesting sessions on mobile for humanitarian innovation, climate tech, digital payments and mobile money, digital inclusion, and also partnering for improved services. I want to thank FCDO in particular for supporting this session, but I also would like to recognize all of our donors and supporters, the Gates Foundation, GIZ and BMZ, NORAD, and also the CEDA as well. And I hope we can work with you continuously over the coming years, as well as with other partners, to make sure that we can leverage digital innovation to reach the sustainable development goals that we've all set for ourselves. As we've heard in this panel, partnerships can go a long way, but there's also still a long way to go for us to reach those goals. I also just want to say how greatly honored I was to be joined by these amazing panelists and to be discussing at MWC Africa how we can create the Africa we want and leverage digital innovation in order to do so. Thanks so much. Thanks so much to all of our partners for supporting the work of the Mobile for Development program, and I hope we can see you next year here in Kigali as well. Thanks.